This is a review for Chapter 29 test, and the first thing you have on your review sheet here are some terms and people. So the first 10 questions on this test, you're going to be asked to identify and state the historical significance of the following people or terms. So take a look. I think in your book, most of these people are at least bold-faced. I would encourage you to take a look on page 668 and 669 and spend some time just reading a couple paragraphs there about Victoriano Huerta and Pancho Villa and the Tampico incident, the Mexican kind of incidents that occur between the United States. And also be aware of John Pershing, Kaiser Wilhelm, Charles Evans Hughes, the ABC powers as well, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. We know the historical significance of Sarajevo. That's kind of where the assassination of Franz Ferdinand occurs, and just the historical significance of sinking of Lusitania, where the Germans attack an innocent ship. And then there is a section in this test that has some geography. There's a map with numbers, with labels. You need to be able to find 3 countries that are associated with the Central Powers and 3 powers or 3 countries that are associated with the Allies. The initial 3 at least, and then know that Italy is a country that joins the Allies later. You'll be able to, should be able to locate the Black Sea, locate Spain. Where did the assassination occur? So know where Sarajevo is. Anyway, the map is there. The pretty obvious things that you just need to be able to identify. And then we get into, I think, about 20 multiple choice questions. And the first thing here then on the multiple choice side of things, we have question. Before Wilson was elected in 1912, he was a state governor. He also was a college president, but he was a governor. So know his previous occupation. In 1912, Woodrow Wilson ran for president, and he ran on the Democrat platform. Democrat platform of 1912 included antitrust legislation. It included monetary reform. It encouraged tariff reductions. It also was supportive of small businesses. That's the Democrat platform of 1912. It did kind of shy away from Taft's dollar diplomacy. Remember that Wilson, kind of a push and emphasis of Wilson all along is isolationist, and so any kind of diplomacy or foreign affairs he's going to shy away from. Next question asks about Jane Addams. Jane Addams placed Teddy Roosevelt's name in nomination for the presidency in 1912, and this symbolizes the rising status of women. When Jane Addams gets involved in this presidential convention and actually nominates a candidate. The 1912 presidential election was notable because it gave voters a very clear political choice in economic philosophies. So Taft and Roosevelt were definitely on one side of things and Wilson was on the other. The 1912 presidential election was notable because it gave voters a very clear choice of political and economic philosophies. And then you need to match the candidates to their political party. The candidates of Wilson, Roosevelt, Taft, and Eugene Debs, and what was their political party. So Wilson was the Democrat, Roosevelt was the progressive, and then Taft was the Republican, and Debs was the socialist. The runaway philosophical winner in 1912 was progressivism. The idea of progress and progressivism. 1912, Wilson became the first person born in the South to be elected to the office of the presidency since the Civil War. So we've gone quite a long time there with the Northerners. Woodrow Wilson was most comfortable surrounding himself with academic scholars. There's kind of a couple questions here about Wilson's character. As a politician, Woodrow Wilson would probably be described as inflexible and very stubborn. One of the things that Wilson did almost immediately that kind of upset some of Congress is that he personally delivered his presidential address directly to Congress instead of sending it over and having somebody else read it. The 16th Amendment then to the Constitution, this is the personal income tax, graduated income tax. Then there's a question here about the Clayton Antitrust Act and how that was. Remember, we spent some time just mentioning that that's the Magna Carta, the kind of original, most important document for labor. Samuel Gompers is involved in labor. Anytime you hear the name Samuel Gompers, think of labor unions, think of strikes. So the Clayton Antitrust Act is very important. Louis Brandeis, he was the first Jew to sit on the Supreme Court. That's again kind of piggybacking off the theme of progressivism, kind of new ways of looking at things. And appointing a Jew to the Supreme Court was thought of as being very progressive. However, Wilson showed limits to his progressivism by actually accelerating the segregation of blacks in the federal bureaucracy. So he was not super progressive when it came to employment of blacks in the federal government. And also remember that World War I, the troops are still segregated. All right, moving on then, we have a couple questions here about Mexico. President Woodrow Wilson refused to intervene in the affairs of Mexico until American soldiers were arrested at the port of Tampico. So the Tampico incident is something you should kind of just read those paragraphs. And before his first term ended, Woodrow Wilson had militarily intervened in or purchased. He had intervened or purchased the islands of Haiti, Dominican Republic. He was intervening in the Virgin Islands and Mexico. He was involved in all of those countries. We did not get involved when Wilson was president. We did not get involved in Cuba at all. Woodrow Wilson's administration refused to extend formal diplomatic recognition to the government in Mexico when it was led by Victoriano Huerta. Couple questions, or one question here about distinguishing between the Central Powers and the Allies. Try to make sure you keep those two powers. Don't confuse the countries that are on which side. Then a couple questions here about these ships. So the Lusitania, the Arabic, the Sussex, the Titanic, every one of these ships, you might want to look at the country of origin. None of them are American ships. We have Americans on board, but none of these ships were American. Now the Bull Moose Party, the Progressive Bull Moose Party, of course, it kind of fades away into obscurity in the election of 1916 when Teddy Roosevelt refuses to be their candidate for president. The Sussex Pledge, the Germans promised not to sink any passenger ships without warnings first. So the Germans, after they sink the Sussex, they give the Sussex Pledge, saying they promise not to do it anymore, but that, of course, is violated shortly after. And then when Woodrow Wilson won re-election, he did so receiving a lot of support from the working class people, the workers, especially the unions. And then the last question here, the Triplewall of Privilege. Wilson launched an attack on this Triplewall of Privilege by attacking high tariffs, powerful trusts, and banking practices, conservative banking practices. Those were the Triplewall of Privilege: high tariffs, powerful trusts, and conservative banking practices. So, again, you'll have to write out a short sentence or two identifying the historical significance of these terms. Not a whole lot of detail, but just enough that I know that you're not totally unfamiliar with those terms or people. And then just kind of, we took a map test before Christmas break, but I would encourage you to go back and just familiarize yourself. At the very least, make sure that you can distinguish between the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. That concludes the review for Chapter 29.